Joining me live now to discuss this is former Home Affairs Secretary Mike Pezzullo. Should we start in Europe, Mike? Because this is something that Donald Trump said that he wanted to solve within days of getting into office once again. Now it is dragging on, and his relationship with Putin seems pretty hot and cold, I might say.
Good morning, Laura. Look, if we start in Europe and then move our way around to Asia, Europe, I think at the start of the year there was a concern that if the American support or commitment to Ukraine was withdrawn too rapidly, their ability to resist would collapse. I think we've actually seen the opposite. Yes, there was that dressing down of Zelensky in the Oval Office. Who can forget that? But since then, the American support has resumed, in fact, to the point now where they're talking both about, according to press reports at least, the providing Ukraine with long-range strike cruise missiles, the Tomahawk cruise missiles that we're all very familiar with, and also providing them with intelligence support so they can do more precise targeting deep in Russia. If I was Putin, I'd be very, very concerned about that. Putin, after almost 4 years, it's coming up to 4 years next February, has made, really after his early gains, not much progress at all. I think the Ukrainians have very bravely fought him to a standstill. And the key point, Laura, that you and I have talked about so many times now, is that Trump has used the leverage that he brings as the president to really get the Europeans into a position where they've got no choice but to step up. And what you've seen since January and February is really a remarkable transformation in Europe. Affirmed again just the other day in Copenhagen when a lot of the leaders met, that they are going to stand up to Putin. Now, they're taking their time about it. They're taking their time to equip their military forces. But I have to say, it's a very impressive set of changes that are favourable to the West, if you like, and have really put Putin in a corner.
I think the number one issue is also a ceasefire in Gaza, some kind of peace deal there. Now, Trump has put forward this 20-point plan, and Netanyahu has agreed to it. Hamas is a big outlier there. The question that I've been asking all week is why would they agree to a plan which essentially signs their own death warrant and makes them extinct? I just don't see how they're going to do that. We have to wait and see how it plays out. A cynical brain or mind might say, well, this is set up to perhaps fail, and then, you know, Benjamin Netanyahu gets to go ahead with his military option in Gaza. What do you think, Mike?
Laura, I wouldn't be quite so cynical, such a cynical head on young shoulders there, Laura.
Oh, no, I wasn't saying me. I was just saying perhaps others, if they were cynical.
Oh, I see.
I'm always glass half full, Mike.
OK, well, look, I'll join you in that because I think what's in prospect, and a bit like the leveraging of the Europeans in Europe, I think there's been a lot of leveraging applied by the Americans, a lot of pressure on Netanyahu to present something, or at least to agree to something that's viable. I agree that there is a concern and a risk that Hamas as a bloc might in the end decide to fight on. I personally doubt that. I think there's so much pressure on Hamas behind the scenes from the Saudis, the Emirates, Qataris and others, that what I think we'll start to see is a fracturing. In other words, there's no such thing as a moderate Hamas leader. They're all extremists and terrorists. But those who are, if you like, more real, shall we say, more realistic or realists, I think that they will accept some kind of, grudgingly, some kind of agreement where they go into some kind of exile or they go into some kind of long-term amnesty with a degree of protection or assurance that they won't be killed. I think others will splinter off and fight on. Islamic Jihad, which is the smaller other body, even more violent, have vowed to fight on anyway. So I think there will be, regrettably, even if the main package is landed, an international stabilisation force arrives, which Australia might have to actually be part of, given that we've recognised Palestine. We probably have to deliver on that now. And this transitional body is put in place over the top of the peace-building efforts. I think, regrettably, that actually might bring peace at the macro level in a pretty dire circumstance where we all want to see the killing stop. However, you might see more terrorist attacks where more radicalised elements splinter off. You saw that dreadful attack in Manchester overnight. There might be more terrorist attacks in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. We might have more terrorist attacks here in places like Australia and America as more violent radicals who do not accept this pathway lash out. And that's what you've seen with peace process elsewhere. You get the fracturing off of more violent groups.
What do you think of, I mean, it's 2 years since the October 7 attacks. Benjamin Netanyahu has been unrelenting in tracking down those that want to see Israel wiped off the map. Absolutely. He's doing this in the name of keeping Jews safe. But in doing that, has he made it more unsafe for the Jewish diaspora? I'm not saying, this is an easy decision or it's a quid pro quo, but has this war made it more unsafe for Australian Jews in particular?
Look, possibly. History will judge that. I think the better way to think about it is that in light of the horrific attack coming up to 2 years ago, the Israeli government, Netanyahu himself and his key ministers, made a strategic decision to try to clean the board because they saw not just Hamas attacking them, but they saw all the other Iranian proxies possibly involved or getting ready to attack. And of course, they saw Iran's hand behind all of that. That, frankly, was a pretty accurate assessment. Whether you agree with what's happened in Gaza, and our hearts are torn every night when we see those children starving, lining up for food, parcels and handouts. That moral aspect of the conflict is something that tugs at all of us.
Yeah.
However, from a just cold, hard, realist, strategic standpoint, he really had to not just take out Hamas, but really deal with the whole network. And a bit like Putin in Russia, Iran now is in a corner. The Americans have stood fast behind the Israelis. Yes, it's been brutal. Yes, it's been aggressive. Yes, the operations in Gaza, because the Hamas the groupings are all intermingled with the population, have presented dreadful images every night. But it's really hard to see what other choice they had after such a horrendous attack. The key for Netanyahu now is taking this opening for a chance for stability, if not peace, at least stability, and staring down his own more extreme elements who want to create a greater Israel. We talked about that in recent weeks, and annex Judea and Samaria and possibly even East Jerusalem. That is the path to more calamity. So if Trump can hold Netanyahu's feet to the fire, and clearly he's got him in a headlock, let's not mince words. The only way we've got to this point is that, as Trump has with the Europeans, but a different kind of headlock, there's no doubt that the United States pressure is what's creating at least a chance. Let's not call it peace maybe, but at least for some more stability from which hopefully peace will emerge.
Yes, let's hope so. Absolutely, Mike. It is complex and we don't propose to be able to solve that and look at all of its complexity in just a couple of moments' time. But we do address this almost weekly and have done for quite some time. I want to just finally get back to China before this October 20 meeting between Albo and Trump, because if we have any leverage, it's our geographical position when it comes to China. We've survived that AUKUS pact. Trump's not preoccupied with China just yet because of all the other issues and theatres of war that we've spoken about. But what should Albo be saying in this meeting?
Look, I think you're right. I don't think the United States is preoccupied with the China relationship or security in Asia at the moment, but I think they're thinking very deeply about it. Even though it's the quietest of the three, what I'd call geopolitical theatres, so Europe, Middle East, around to Asia, even though it's the quietest, it's the one that carries the most risk, because unlike Europe and the Middle East, where you don't have two great powers directly confronting one another, yes, the Americans are sort of potentially confronting Russia in the Middle East if they give them the Ukrainians those missiles, but typically it's about third and fourth parties who are engaged and the great powers are standing back. In Asia, there is a prospect of a direct clash over something like Taiwan or the South China Sea, all the other issues we've spoken about at length in recent weeks. I think this is a golden opportunity, as we discussed last week, to start a conversation, not to end the conversation, but to start a conversation about, Mr. President, what do you see as, what does peace look like in Asia? It can't just simply be calling for the UN and the multilateral system to impose the rules that everyone will respect. We know that China will not do that. There's already Permanent Court of Arbitration ruling saying that their claims over the South China Sea are not accepted. They just blast past that. The only thing that's going to hold the peace in Asia is, frankly, great power engagement, deterrence by the US and its allies and partners of China, and, frankly, deterrence means a willingness to engage, regrettably, if it comes to it, in combat with a view to defeat any aggression. There is something going on in the background on China regarding trade at the moment. It'll be really interesting to see whether the Chinese side and Xi himself decides to play some of the political cards that he's got to say, look, if you want a trade deal, I want to start to talk about how I get my strategic goals in Asia to my satisfaction without you and I coming to a clash. The next 6, 12 and 18 months are going to be critical. This meeting comes at a perfect time for Australia to start to inject its views, to outline its interests and to shape American thinking at a time when it's still probably quite formative. I don't think, as we've discussed before, I don't think the President's made a hard and fast decision about whether he's prepared to risk war. However, and you saw that meeting with all the generals and admirals the other day, and yes, a lot of the media was about overcoming the so-called woke agenda or getting rid of overweight generals and admirals. But the subtext of that, the subtext was, this is a military machine that needs to be ready to go to war. And frankly, there's only one war that I think is preoccupying them, because they can handle just about every other contingency. You saw them deal with Iran. Yeah. The one that I think is preoccupying them is, if it came to a conflict with China, how would we prevail, and indeed would we prevail? I think there's a lot of consideration being given to that in Washington, Honolulu and so on and so forth. And so this meeting comes at a very opportune time in that discussion. I think so. Mike, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much. Thanks, Laura.